All right, I'm going to start the webinar. Good afternoon. We'll let folks join the webinar here. Thanks for being here. We'll give it folks one more minute and then we'll get started. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Susan Milhauser. I'm a natural hazards planner focused on wildfire with DLCD. And I use she, her pronouns, which I forgot to update my name here, so I'll just say that out loud. But we're really happy to have folks here today, and we're going to take a few minutes and provide an overview of DLCD's Wildfire Adapted Communities recommendations, and then really spend the bulk of our time today with you all talking about what types of resources are needed at the local government level to implement the recommendations. And so I will just take a moment. I introduced myself. We have a couple other DLCD staff people who have joined us today, so we didn't practice this part, but if the people who are on screen with their cameras, if you want to take a minute and introduce yourselves, that would be great.
Sure, I will, Susan. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Sadie Carney. I'm a policy analyst and communications manager at DLCD. I also use she, her pronouns. And I will turn it over to Angie.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Angie Brewer. I'm the Central Oregon Regional Rep for DLCD and work with quite a few on the phone today. Thank you for attending. I've also worn county planning hats in years past, and so I'd be interested to hear your responses to a lot of the survey questions today, and if I can be of resource, please call on me. I'll turn it over to Marion.
Hi, I'm Marion Lahav. I'm the Natural Hazards Mitigation Planning Program Coordinator at DLCD. I also have some local planning background, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you. We have a couple other staff as well. We got all of our people here today, but John and Sarah, I was just asking the DLCD staff just to give a quick introduction.
Everybody, John Jennings. I'm the Community Services Specialist for DLCD. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Marvin. I am the Measure 37, Measure 49 Specialist and temporary Mid-Willamette Valley Regional Representative.
Great, thank you, everybody. So as I mentioned, we will have an opportunity for questions. It's set up as a webinar, but folks should have the ability to include questions as we're going or respond to our questions using the Q&A function. Either it's in the bar at the top or the bottom of your screen. Also, you should be able to use the chat function, and that the chat messages will go to the panelists, and then we can respond. And then we can kind of hopefully have a dialogue in this webinar format. Hopefully that works. All right, so I am going to, as I mentioned, give a brief overview of Senate Bill 762 and what DLCD's requirements are under that bill. Let's see if my slide, there we go. Okay, so welcome and introductions. I included the land acknowledgement, apologies. Project overview, and then we'll have time to talk through our local government survey and questions, and then talk a little bit about next steps. We did some welcome and introductions. I apologize, I think I hid the land acknowledgement slide. So I know Sadie doesn't know it by heart, but so I apologize, we're going to skip over that, which I do not mean any disrespect, but we do want to acknowledge the tribes and people who have called Oregon their home for millennia. It's very important. So now I will give you a quick project overview. So if folks are not familiar with Senate Bill 762, we have quite a bit of information on our webpage, including links to the original legislation, our recommendations report, but at a broad brush, Senate Bill 762 is a comprehensive wildfire preparedness and resiliency bill, and it's really intended to establish a proactive approach to help communities improve wildfire preparedness through 3 strategies. So creating fire adapted communities, developing safe and effective response, and increasing the resiliency of Oregon's landscapes. And DLCD's piece of this really is the first bullet, creating fire adapted communities. It does under Senate Bill 762, there's action from multiple state agencies, 11, and again, really focused on minimizing loss of life and property, protecting the lives of firefighters, protecting and managing forest assets, and really looking to create a more predictable and protected future for communities and development at risk to wildfire. DLCD's recommendations in particular are to develop a recommendations report for the legislature and the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council. And we have been asked under Senate Bill 762 to provide recommendations about potential updates or changes to the statewide land use planning program. Also, we've been asked to look at opportunities in local comprehensive plans and zoning codes, as well as identify state and local resources needed to implement. And as we mentioned earlier, that is really the focus of our time today. And under Senate Bill 762, we're also allowed to look at regional differences. And hopefully, folks, you're here because you saw our survey, which includes the link to register for this webinar today. So we really appreciate your taking the time to join us, and hopefully we can answer some questions and get you information you need to complete the survey. I will also note about our recommendations that under Senate Bill 762, DLCD can include, but we're not limited to, looking at provisions around sufficient defensible space, building codes, safe evacuation, development considerations, and in areas of extreme or high wildfire risk. I will note that if you have looked at our recommendations report, we're really primarily focused on safe evacuation and development considerations. Other state agencies, the Office of State Fire Marshal and the Department of Consumer and Business Services Building Codes Division are focused under the legislation on defensible space standards, developing minimum statewide defensible space standards, and the Building Codes Division is tasked with developing standards under the Oregon Residential Specialty Code for building hardening for homes. And so our recommendations don't really touch on that. There is a little overlap with defensible space, just in terms of how that is sometimes administered through zoning or development codes, but we're not looking at recommendations around the actual standards. The last couple slides here, just our timeline. So we are tasked with providing this report to the legislature by October 1st. And as I mentioned, they will be considered by the legislature and the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council. In 2023, the legislature will consider our recommendations, and they may pass legislation that directs the department to do further work to develop, either regulatory program or voluntary programs through rulemaking or other methods. And we really don't know what we'll be directed to do until the legislature convenes and has a conversation. And that could, as I mentioned, lead to rulemaking or voluntary program development for each of our recommendations. So again, I don't want to take too much time, but I will give you a quick overview of the recommendations. They cover actually 5 areas. So community information and engagement, safe evacuation and firefighting response, looking at wildfire mitigation requirements for areas of new development, as well as opportunities to support communities more directly with recovery planning services, and looking more broadly at how communities plan for natural hazards. So our first recommendation, and I will note here that the process to develop these recommendations kicked off in February. We have held community listening sessions. We had a wildfire adapted communities stakeholder group that met for 5 long meetings to talk through potential recommendations and kind of the pros and cons, and helped refine the recommendations that are included in our public review draft. We've done community surveying. We had an online open house. We held last week 2 more community listening sessions where we were able to have a more in-depth conversation about the actual recommendations, and the presentation from those meetings last week, and recordings of those meetings will hopefully be posted on our website in the next day or 2 if folks are interested to go back and look at those meetings and what was covered. Also, the draft recommendations report is available on our website, and we have a public comment period through the 16th of September where we're gathering feedback on those recommendations. I will also note we've been meeting with stakeholders and other state agencies, and have been in a consultation process with tribes in Oregon. So our first recommendation is really about encouraging or requiring, depending what direction the legislature points us, for cities and counties to really prioritize community information and engagement and any types of planning efforts that are happening in the community around wildfire adapted communities, and really looking at not creating yet another process, but if a community is looking at and working on the other recommendations that we're putting forth, that process should be a thoughtful process that is a variety of stakeholders and community members. And this is really based on best practices research that show that for community to really embrace wildfire mitigation work, people's, not only do their needs need to be known upfront, particularly vulnerable community members, but the more people are engaged, the more successful programs are likely to be. Our second recommendation is focused around improving transportation networks for safe evacuation and firefighting response. And this is an opportunity for a community or a region or a county working with folks who manage roadways, so that could be state, could be tribal, could be county, could be city, to identify gaps in the transportation network and identify opportunities and needed funding to improve that existing transportation network to improve evacuation and response in the event of a wildfire. The third recommendation really looks more to the future with new development, and are there opportunities in zoning codes and subdivision ordinances to ensure that future development is that the road networks are developed in a way that increases connectivity and site access, that really has sufficient road network going forward to allow evacuation and response to happen in the event of a wildfire. Our fourth recommendation really gets into a local comprehensive plan and development code, and looking in areas of extreme and high wildfire risk. What are the opportunities to include wildfire mitigation standards related to land use for new development? And I won't go into a lot of detail there, but we're also looking at opportunities to ensure that appropriate services are provided to new development, again, to address the increased risk of wildfire. And then also looking at, siting, facilities with concentrated vulnerable populations or important infrastructure and hazardous materials, or not hazardous materials, but facilities that generate a lot of hazardous materials. And again, related to recommendation 4, these standards could look at things like site and design standards, public facilities, so parks and open space. Are there policies in those plans for managing parks and open space in a way that reduces wildfire risk, looking at types of uses, potential mitigation standards related to density, and looking at where there would be opportunities or a need for a type of waiver where standards might not be able to be met. The 5th recommendation is really looking at DLCD is letting the legislature know that our department has assisted communities in the past with post-disaster recovery planning, and there is interest in doing this work in the future. And so looking at ways that we could, through grants and technical assistance, and this is what our survey will get more into, the types of tools and resources that communities will need. But this is around how can DLCD help communities in advance be better prepared for the work they need to do after a wildfire or other disaster, and direct support to cities and counties through professional services, which could be through planning consultants or otherwise. And we provided a similar type of grant after the 2020 wildfires to help several communities, process land use applications and building permits in a time when people were ready to rebuild and staff capacity was limited. And the last recommendation is around, as I mentioned earlier, looking at how communities plan for natural hazards. And there are opportunities to look at how communities do natural hazard mitigation planning in conjunction with the development of community wildfire protection plans, which many communities develop. All communities develop a natural hazard mitigation plan. And so really looking at opportunities to tighten up the timing when a community wildfire protection plan is developed and how that can inform a natural hazard mitigation plan. And then looking at providing additional resources beyond what DLCD already does with local governments to help communities more directly integrate any strategies related to land use that come out of their natural hazard mitigation plan into implementing codes and actionable comprehensive plan policies. And I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
All right. I think that's me, Susan.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you. And just by way of curiosity, I think I can see that we have 23 participants. If you just wanted to introduce yourself and put where you're from, just as the person who's doing, communications and community engagement for the agency kind of broadly, I'm always curious about that. And then if you could let us know where, if you remember, maybe you've seen it in so many places you can't, but where you heard about this webinar. It's useful for us in terms of knowing how to best reach this audience, which is such an important audience to us. And we'll do more of it, and we'll try to get better at it as we go forward. So yeah, if you just want to put your name and where you're from and how you heard about this, if you remember, that would be super helpful. Thank you and hello. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to walk through the survey that we have developed. Maybe some of you have already taken it. Maybe you haven't. Maybe that's why you're here. If you haven't taken it, we sure hope you will. So I'm going to go ahead. Oh my gosh, my computer wants me to restart. Not now. Of course it does. I'm going to disable your sharing, Susan, and take us over here. So those of you familiar with SurveyMonkey kind of know that I'm looking at the back end. So this is what I see on my preview and score tab as I'm walking through here. And this is the survey that we have designed for local governments. And I'd just like to walk through it, and feel free to ask questions in the chat. I think that's probably the most effective way. And I'll try to keep my eyes on the chat. I think I have to open the little window here, bring it back. And we have other staff members that can respond to questions in the chat as we move through this as well. But I would like to have a conversation. So I'm not sure, when I think about it, Susan, if folks are able to like interact voice wise without being promoted to a panelist, but we'll see how things go. And if we want to promote people to panelists to facilitate conversation, we can. Anyway, so this is our survey. It's got a link right up at the top to our big recommendations report and to a high level fact sheet. If you're looking for information to share with your community or with elected leaders in, certainly some people are going to dig into the bigger report and the appendices, and we really appreciate folks that are able to give it that level of attention. But the fact sheet is a very shareable document. I think it's maybe 4 pages now, but this links to that. It's a PDF, it's printable, it's easy. It's got kind of everything you need at a high level to share this information. So please feel free to share that amongst the people who might want to know. Here's our webinar link. Too late now, you're already here. I'm going to pause for a moment and talk about what could the work ahead look like. There's a lot of unknowns at this point. But just as an example timeline, and we will be posting this table to our website too, because we've gotten feedback that it's useful and helpful in helping people understand just exactly what to expect, especially as we're looking at local government implementation. We know you guys are stretched pretty thin. And we want to give realistic expectations on when things are going to happen, if they happen. So in October 2022, we'll submit our recommendations to the legislature and to the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council. Then in the 2023 long session, so right here, January to June, the legislature will consider the recommendations that DLCD has made. They will likewise consider the recommendations that the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council has made. I think it is quite likely we will see some legislation that advances this work. What is included in it, what shape it takes, we don't know. But if that legislation directs DLCD to adopt rules related to wildfire mitigation, and that's really our hope with the recommendations, is that the legislature, in part with that public process and the stakeholder process that the legislative session is, will help give us some sidebars and some guidance as we move forward with where to focus our efforts, where not to focus our efforts, etc. So if they direct us to adopt rules related to wildfire mitigation, our hope, and again, this could change based on what is in the legislation. As we know, Senate Bill 762 had some very hard timelines in it for state agencies to respond to. And we don't know what's ahead, but this is one example of what it could look like. We could be doing rulemaking between July 23 and July 24. Our hope is that we would conclude any rulemaking exercise before we have to submit our agency request budget, because our agency request budget would have the technical and grant funding assistance request that we are hoping to get from you today and over the many months to come if we're involved in a rulemaking effort, right? We can't know everything that's going to be involved in it today, but as we move forward through this, we want to continue the conversations. This is just a first, like a preliminary exercise so that we have something to include in our recommendations. Anyway, concluding rulemaking in July 2024, that's an approximation. Then in August 2024, we would submit that agency request budget with a funding request for local implementation of this work. In July 2025, phased local implementation may begin, depending on availability of funding. And then finally, July 2025 through 2027, our 25-27 agency budget is available. That money is available to us. And if it includes grant money for local governments to implement these recommendations or the rules that are developed as a result, that's when it becomes available to local governments. So happy to answer any questions related to that. Feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I will keep moving through this. Susan talked about wildfire adapted communities. This survey, it tries to make that direct link to the recommendations she just walked through. So we've got recommendation 2, recommendation 3, 4, 5, 6. A lot of these questions hopefully are pretty straightforward and easy to answer, right? We've got a little slider button here. How much do you want to do wildfire planning in your community? Is it a lot? Is it none? Is it about halfway? A little bit? And then this is useful for us in kind of knowing where the state is helping move things forward and on what schedule, right? So we, in the feedback we've gotten so far, we're seeing that a lot of people are waiting for state guidance and rules to be developed before planning for wildfire mitigation. And we've heard that in our community conversations and our stakeholder group as well. People really want to be knowing what their neighbors are doing and doing the same thing, because regional coordination is a big it's a big element of how we are successful in addressing these problems. And I think a lot of us can recognize that, and a lot of local planners certainly are seeming to. Quick link to our technical assistance grants that can be used for wildfire planning at any point that they are available. And then in question 3, we're trying to assess what local governments have already done, what's there today, right? So we've got a lot of pieces that are required in our, or not required, but in the recommendations. We have a lot of pieces that are included in our recommendations. But some of this is work that's already being done. So when you're taking this, you either have the opportunity to do a checkbox or no checkbox. And you can really, I think you can choose more than one checkbox coming across here. So all that apply. And then our next question is where I'm really going to slow down and try to have a conversation with this group. And that is, and really, if we have questions, this is a good time for them to come up and for us to take the opportunity to answer them. So as we are trying to figure out what kind of resources, what kind of staffing, what kind of money, if it's a consultant, what is it that local governments are going to need to implement this work in a way that will protect our communities from wildfire? Is it part of your base budget? Are you going to need additional staff? Will you need additional staff and grant assistance? We've gotten some really positive feedback from our commission, from our community listening sessions, and I think in the survey results as well, that model code would be very useful to folks. We've had examples in the past where DLCD has had a bunch of consultants and placed them in communities to sort of relieve communities of the burden of having to put out an RFP and then select between consultants just trying to find the best fit. We've also had circumstances where local governments have selected their own consultant, but we understand that that can be a time burden, which ultimately is a resources burden on local governments. So if it's more appealing to folks in this group, or local planning shops, that the state finds somebody or they find somebody, we'd love to know that. And I don't know, I need more information. I don't have a strong sense of what we would need, because it's true, we're not in a rulemaking space yet. We haven't got a lot of this really nailed down, but we do have some best practices around the state. Some communities have done many elements of the work that's outlined in the recommendations. So, and we did our best to capture what felt like the different work elements included in the recommendations. And another reason to have this conversation and call with you is to say, we may not have gotten that right. We may have missed something. We may not have thought of something. We may be trying to pack too much into one work element. And so at the bottom of this question, you know, there's a place, please call that out. You know, if you're looking at this question and you're saying, well, my goodness, this strategies or requirements in place to mitigate wildfire risk for new development, DLCD, you have no idea. This is like a 4-part project for us at a local level. Please let us know. Because again, you know, every jurisdiction is different. The process is different from place to place, and you know, and hopefully through by working together to create wildfire adapted communities, we can bring some unity to that. But you know, we may not have seen everything from this vantage at this point. So please call it out and let us know. And then this question 5, roughly how much do you anticipate it would cost for your jurisdiction to complete each of the following? And, you know, we have ranges from no additional resources up to over $100,000. And hopefully that's an adequate sense of range. Obviously, you know, if we see a lot of answers coming in at over $100,000, we have more work to do to understand what that means to a local government. But these more discrete ranges, you know, we can kind of start to get a sense for what might we need to ask to, how do we need to start leading this discussion with our legislators in the coming session and setting expectations in terms of what we'll need to implement these recommendations at a local level. So Susan, I see you came on camera. Do you want me to pause and give you a chance to say something, or should I just barrel on through?
Yeah, thanks, Sadie. I was just putting in the chat, but I wanted to note if folks do have questions as we're going, you can use the raise hand feature. And then I can see that you've raised your hand and I can allow attendees to talk. So we can get you unmuted and you can ask a question, so, or make a comment.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so again, here we're trying to get a sense from you you know, no additional resources. This is work that is already part of our core work, which, you know, we are getting some feedback on the CWPPs and the NHMPs that is part of a community's or local jurisdiction's core work. But then some of this we know would be new work. You know, there's not many municipalities or jurisdictions around the state that have done a lot of evacuation planning. You know, a TSP assessment seems like it could be a new thing for most places. So I see that John Schaefer has a hand up. So I don't know, while I'm sharing a screen, how to promote anybody or do anything, Susan. So maybe you can help with that.
I think I've just allowed him to speak. So hopefully we can hear you, Mr. Schaefer. Oh, looks like you're muted.
Well, this is Mark Albertson from Lake County. I might be under John Schaefer because he sent me the link. I'm the commissioner here. I got a couple questions. Number one, who appointed the DLCD for this role? Especially since we should have fire professionals and county commissioners, and we were never notified by the DLCD, at least here in Lake County, about it. I guess we could start with those.
Sure.
Go ahead, Susan.
I was going to say, so under Senate Bill 762, the legislature directed DLCD to research and come up with recommendations related to land use opportunities to mitigate wildfire risk. And then in terms of providing information broadly to the public about the recommendations development process. We have been using a variety of communication channels. So the Association of Oregon Counties, the League of Cities, our DLCD's email newsletter, reaching out to local planners throughout the state, and a variety of other methods. So that's how we've been getting the word out. And yeah, Sadie has anything to add?
I would say, you know, one of the things that we are asked to do as an implementing agency is to coordinate with the Oregon State Fire Marshal and the Department of Forestry in the development of these recommendations. In addition to, I should say, the Department of Consumer and Business Services, who are in charge of the building hardening standards that are included in Senate Bill 762. And we have been coordinating closely with those different state agencies from a firefighting perspective. And we also have a number of folks on our stakeholder group, our stakeholder work group that represent different firefighting professions that have been able to really inform this and help us understand where the fire code comes in and how it interacts with land use, and how land use changes to our land use system could better support our fire code and our firefighting professionals. So I hope that's helpful in understanding what we're trying to do on our side.
And I understand that, and that's fine with me. The problem with the LCDC, or whatever they're called now, for me is hard, is because economic development is closely tied with the planning process. And with these housing crises that we're having, it's already hard enough to get houses built in our community, especially in ag communities where most of our ground is EFU. And then to add more stuff on our small communities, it's really making it hard to develop economic development, because there's nowhere for people to live.
Yeah. I mean, housing is such a challenge at so many places around the state. I think we're very aware of that here at the agency, and certainly our intention is not to make things more difficult in that regard. So appreciate the feedback. I'm going to drop the link to our public comment form in the chat. That would be a better place for us to capture concerns like that than here. We're really trying to understand the resources necessary for local government implementation versus having a policy conversation at this point in this meeting. But we do want to capture those thoughts and share that feedback with our commission and with our staff as we move forward to developing a final set of recommendations that we will submit to the legislature, because it's really important to hear. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that there. So that is a public comment form. We are accepting written public comment through the 19th. Is that right, Susan? Okay, the 19th. And all of the public comment that we receive through that time will be included for our commissioners' review. And obviously, you know, for anybody else's review, we have that available publicly. Anyway, do we have other questions? I can also stop this share, or if people have questions more specific.
Yeah, it looks like Dan Duran has their hand up, so I will do that. Let's see.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Dan Dorn, Umatilla County Commissioner. A couple of follow-up questions to the Lake County questions. You mentioned that you have a stakeholders group looking at implementation. In reality, you are rulemaking implementations at the local level. I'd like to know, do you have a list of your stakeholders that have been involved in this rulemaking? And then how are you truly defining implementation? It's not LCDC that's implementing this. This is the local land use planning organizations at whatever level, at the county level or the city level. I was confused on that statement.
I guess I'm a little confused about the question. I did drop a link from our website to our stakeholder group membership list. There's also, I can put our general 762 website a link into the chat, and you can look more in depth at what has been involved in our community engagement process and who has been involved. And there's also a capture of a lot of the comments and feedback that we've received so far. But could you repeat the question about implementation?
During the presentation, the comment was made that LCDC is directed by the legislative to put together an implementation and rulemaking plan. The implementations at the local level. So I'm confused at what LCDC is going to do to implement.
Sure.
I can
Okay,
I can
go
respond
ahead.
real quick, Sadie. Yeah, so I want to be really clear. So the legislature actually directed the department to develop just recommendations. We're not entering into any rulemaking. This is really an initial report of potential recommendations for the legislature to consider. So we're not entering into rulemaking. Looks like Sadie's showing the schedule. And so really this is kind of a first pass at what the department, along with members of our stakeholder group and community members more broadly, including, planners from around the state and commissioners and city council members and elected representatives, feel like are considerations for the legislature. And then based on the feedback from the legislature, where we have outlined potential regulatory requirements, then we would enter into rulemaking if directed. We've also outlined for many of our recommendations a voluntary option. So if that is the direction we're given from the legislature, it would be more of developing model codes and other tools for local governments to implement to meet the needs of that specific community. So hopefully that's helpful. We're not doing rulemaking at this point, where we are quite a distance from doing that if we're directed to.
Yeah, thank you, but those were your comments, not ours. But thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, hopefully looking at the schedule here makes it more clear if we misspoke or the wrong words came out. So I apologize if that was the case, but really I think what we have in the table that's shared on the screen is accurate. So hopefully that can bring some clarity.
And just to follow up with that, looking at the list of the stakeholders, I don't really see any local land use planners or planning directors from county or city on your list.
We have a number.
Yes. So local planners, planning directors, we have 2 county commissioners.
Right, but I'm talking county land use planning.
Oh, correct. Yes. The director of Douglas County Planning Department, as well, Lane County, and various cities, Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments, as well as folks. We really tried to seek feedback from people in communities that have already been impacted from wildfire, as well as, that are potentially at risk more broadly, and a geographic representation around the state as well. So I think if we could continue, if folks have questions about the actual survey and resources, that I think is the best use the rest of our time. If our participants who are county commissioners, if you would like to have a conversation with us in a separate meeting, I'm happy to work with Palmer Mason, our senior policy advisor, to set that up. And so please, I can put my email in the chat, and we can find a time to meet with you all, as well as the Association of County Planning Directors. We have met with them multiple times, as well as the Association of Oregon County, so we can make sure everyone's feedback is being considered.
And I just, I want to call attention to a question that came up in the chat in case folks didn't see it. And that was a question about who should take this survey? Who do we want feedback from? Is it really, should we just have one person from our local government responding to this? And my answer really is not at all. You know, a more informed perspective, in my opinion, is a broader perspective. And I know there's a lot of different departments that come to play. And so in the comment, you know, it was emergency management, the planning department, public works, the building department. We understand there's a lot of intersections in the work that is outlined in the recommendations. Feel free to share this survey link throughout the community to all of the different potentially impacted departments and divisions. You are limited to one response per device. So you can't all take the survey from one person's phone. But if you're each sitting at your computer, you should have no problem submitting. It's one per device is the only limit on the survey responses that we have. So thank you for the question. I have one question that I would like to pose to people on the phone, Susan, if I may. And that is, I'm going to scroll down, so pardon me. When we have asked, it's really in this question 5, we have seen a surprising variety of responses, really like kind of all across the board and really not really weighted anywhere. When we ask for determination of the cost for recovery planning, which is recommendation 5. And I was wondering if there were folks participating on this call that might help us understand understand that response. A lot of these other ones, you know, we can see kind of things lumping in one direction or another or around, you know, one or two sums. But really recovery planning, we're getting a very even spread. And that makes it hard for us to understand what it is local governments are thinking of when they are saying recovery plan and when they are reading recommendation 5, or if there's things that you're thinking of when you say, you know, when a local government says recovery plan, that maybe DLCD isn't thinking of and that isn't captured in recommendation 5. So if anyone has thoughts on that, I would love to hear them, or feel free to, you know, when you answer the survey, maybe you can give some thought to that and sort of put it down here in the comment box if you haven't already done the survey. But it would be useful to understand why that is coming back with such an even spread.
So it looks like Corrine has her hand up, so I will click that button and
Yeah,
there you go.
thanks. This is Karina Rendes. I'm an associate planner at Washington County Department of Land Use and Transportation. So when I was looking at this survey and kind of passing it along to other people in the organization to be thinking about appropriate responses, I was like, well, recovery planning doesn't really even apply to us because the proposal is a DLCD program to staff that and build that up and provide that to local jurisdictions when necessary. So I wasn't really reading that as a burden on local jurisdictions, and for communities that are not doing recovery planning right now, you know, is it really applicable to them? So I'm wondering if the way people are thinking about that question may be influencing your results. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think that that is probably accurate, but we you know, we also, if communities are feeling like they need additional recovery planning, then I think it would be important. We would like to know about what it is they think they need in order to be successful in this space. So I think your observation is spot on. And I'm hoping that maybe after this webinar, as people fill out the survey, we can maybe get a little feedback if we're maybe not capturing everything we should be in recommendation 5, or if local governments are thinking about recovery planning in a different way, that we should also be mindful of, be useful information. But I appreciate the feedback. And welcome. Thank you for being here. Let's see, Angie has a comment in the chat. We don't need to take everybody's entire lunch hour, but Angie, do you want to speak to that?
I was just going to say that may be a different way to frame it for folks on the line who are trying to think what recovery might constitute. I've seen it approached in a handful of directions in different jurisdictions over the years. And I know at least for one particularly large fire in the gorge a number of years ago, I don't want to put Gordon on the spot, but Gordon may have some thoughts about economic recovery specifically, as well as a residential recovery on that sort of the outskirts. But I don't know if Gordon's still on or not. I would need to pull up my participants list here. He is. I don't want to put you on the spot, Gordon, but I thought you might have some thoughts along those lines.
Our biggest well, let's see, where's my camera? I don't have a camera. The biggest problem we had was how to keep the tourists controlled when they came to look at the fire. But we did recover really pretty quickly. The Eagle Creek fire became a new tourist attraction, and so that helped us overcome that 2017 fire.
Thanks for letting me put you on the spot.
I'll never forgive you.
All right. Well, thank you for the overview of this survey, Sadie, and for the conversation. There's a couple more slides, really just I can share real quickly, just again, giving an overview of our process more broadly. So I will do that. And then again, if folks have, you think of additional questions or comments, I've shared my email in the chat, as well as you can, send us a chat here in the meeting. But so here are our next steps. So we are accepting the public comment more broadly on the recommendations through September 16th. I will note that the Land Conservation and Development Commission is meeting September 22nd and 23rd, and will be in person in John Day, as well as accepting verbal comment online. So if folks, don't have an opportunity by the 16th to really get through the recommendations, you're welcome to sign up.
I'm on a Zoom call, but keep going.
You're welcome to sign up to testify verbally at that meeting. We, as I mentioned, we have the report out. Please review it. After the commission meeting on the 22nd, we've been checking in with and we'll be giving an update to the Wildfire Programs Advisory Council. And so just a reminder, our report is going to the legislature as well as the council, and the council then has an opportunity to look at our recommendations, and they have a report they're required to give to the legislature as well this fall. So their report is due at the end of October. And so the council, which has a broad representation around the state, will also be making recommendations on our work, as well as all of the other state agencies. So they're working on that report right now. And then October 1st, and then we see what happens with the legislature. And, I think through the session, conversations will be ongoing. There are certainly opportunities with our legislators to provide feedback and testify and talk with your own elected representatives to continue the conversation. And Oh, here's a graphic. And this, Sadie had this in the survey, but again, just to mention, you know, we have our legislative session. And then potential, I should have quotes on the chart here, potential quote unquote DLCD rulemaking, again, depending on the feedback from the legislature. And certainly if we are directed to do rulemaking, that will be, you know, working with our commission, which will lead that effort, and we'll have a robust engagement process at that time. And tribal consultation is ongoing. And I think I've mentioned these opportunities a couple of times. We've put these in the chat, but we can, so you all should have those. They are also on our website, which I believe Sadie shared that link in the chat as well. And then here's the big thank you from all of us here at DLCD. And again, just to, you know, reiterate that any feedback that you all can provide through the survey will really help inform the information that goes to the legislature. We're trying to come up with recommendations that are actionable, and really it's critically important that we know what types of resources are needed locally to ensure that this work can get done. And I think that is all I have. I don't see any other hands raised. I do not. So I want to thank you all for coming today, and to my colleagues at DLCD for being here to answer questions and provide insight. I think that's all I have. So thank you, everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.